Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and this is the Political Postbox, where I pick about half a dozen comments that have appeared on the channel from the past week, some of the more engaged with ones, and add my own further thoughts to them. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So on the first one, at the moment, extremely topical. They're all quite topical. And this person saying here, so saw a comment last night on the BBC Have Your Say page from some member of the British public saying Johnson and Hancock should get the George Medal, which is a medal for civilians who've done something terribly brave, by the way, for their fantastic handling of the COVID-19 crisis, and they're reaching 122,000 tests a day, even though the BBC report pointed out that almost a third of all those tests had only been posted out to people yesterday and not even used for testing yet. And and I did a video on this yesterday, and absolutely this is the point. And I saw the BBC report myself, and the headline said that the target had been met, and yet the blurb in the actual article said that it hadn't. That they'd done some fiddle to meet that target, which is egregious to say the least. It really is. If you read the headline, you'd come away with a certain impression. If you then read the article, you'd come away with a different impression. And you shouldn't do that. That is deliberate. And they'll understand that a lot of people will just scan headlines, whether it's on the phone or on the computer. And you really shouldn't do that. But there's been even more news on this. Yes, it's absolutely true that, as you say, it's going on for about 50,000. In fact, it's 49,000 of the tests. Some of them hadn't even been sent out. You say there that almost a third of those have only just been posted out. No, actually, only about half of these erroneous ones had been posted out. Some of them hadn't even been posted out yet. They were just planning to post them out. They counted those as well. But it's worse than that, because there's now been reports of some of the people who are receiving these home testing kits. So, first of all, I said in my video, before I'd even seen these reports, I said, well, you can't, first of all, those tests are not being carried out that day. That's actually obvious. You cannot count them for that day because they haven't been carried out that day. But you can't even say that they will be carried out at some point in the future either. Because what if people have difficulty with them? And I know what some people would think. It's a home testing kit. It's designed to be easy to use, easy instructions. Of course, people will be able to do it. And, but no, the reports are that it's actually the particular kits that the government has bought and is sent out is not a particularly easy one to use at all. It had access to ones that would be easy to use, little swab of the old saliva. No, that's not what's been sent out. Much trickier. So actually, some people are going to mess them up. And even if people use them, remember, you know how it is sometimes if you have to provide samples of things yourself. Sometimes it's not adequate and you have to do another one. Well, the same could have been true here, but in this particular case, it's very likely to be true. So there is an issue that people will not be able to use the kits correctly. Then there's the issue that some of these testing kits are not being provided with return labels. So even if they can use the test themselves, they can't send it to be analysed because there's nothing to send it to. They've not been given, so the kits themselves are not complete. Some of them haven't come with the return labels. Then, for some of them as well, there's no, what people need to also do. It's all right getting the kit. Let's say you get the kit, and let's say you are able to use the swabs, and it's all done correctly, and you put it in there, and you've got a return label, and you post it off. Fantastic. It gets analysed. Great. The cytologist does the analysis, and then they go, right, okay, who is this person? Because they need to put the results on the system. There's nothing to match it to, because some of the testing kits that have been sent out have not been sent out with the codes that people need to be able to register online. So they can't match it to the person. It's a complete shambles. So of these 50,000 tests that they claimed to have done on that day, none of which had been done. They did about 73,000. But of the 50,000 that they claimed to have done that weren't done, because they were either sent out or were about to be sent out, many of them will never result in a test because either it's not possible to do the test or it's not easy to do the test. it's not possible to send it to the lab for processing, or if those two things are there, it's not possible to match it to the patient. The shambles just gets worse every day, it seems to me. But coming back to this first comment about people, they should get the George Medal, which actually isn't true. I mean, that's for bravery for a start. Bravery, not doing great things. There are people who do great things. We give them knighthoods. Or if you donate enough to the Tory party. But it's... People do think that the government are doing a good job. A lot of people. And I know there's an element, and this is well known, you get this all the time. When a country is going through a national emergency, people tend to be much less critical of the government than normal. And that will definitely be playing a part in that. But we always have to remember the Conservatives in particular have by circulation, most of the media on their side. And even though you do see the odd article in the likes of the Daily Mail and the Times and the Express, sometimes the Sun when it's got nothing better to do, but very rarely the Sun. And you will see critical stories now and then. It's not the norm. Even now, it's not the norm. It's like one day they'll say something critical, then the next day they'll just forget all about it and go on, oh, Boris is better. Oh, he's got a kid. Isn't that nice? Yeah, he's got loads of kids. Anyway. But that's on that one. The shambles gets worse and worse every day, and yet people are not aware of it. And that's what, for me, is the most maddening thing about it. I don't mind the most god-awful political views, if they're honest. If they were honest. If the Conservatives were at least being honest about what they're doing and what they're not doing and their reasoning, and if the majority of people still saying, yeah, we like that idea, then I'm just in the minority and that's all there is to it. But when they are lying, then that's different. Because I could be of a majority view. You know, it could well be that the Conservatives wouldn't possibly get into power based on honesty, which they wouldn't. But that's the situation we have. Maddening, utterly maddening. Anyway, next one. So this is I edited out from the same person. There's a couple of comments, and this was very much talking about the selfishness of going out and breaking lockdown measures, which is, I mean, it is. I can only say anecdotally, it's happening a lot more. I've seen people clearly breaking these measures now. You know, I talked about a few examples on Friday of where there's suspicious behaviour, but it's plausible. I mean, I don't judge people because there are plausible reasons for why these things may be happening. But when you can see people receiving visitors, you know, and it's very clear they're receiving visitors, then yeah. But someone's saying here, how will at-risk groups catch it if they're staying indoors? And then they further followed the thought with, at-risk groups would only be likely to catch it if they also break lockdown rules. But again, and I have to say this, not so much for political commentary, but just getting the message out there. An at-risk group, what is an at-risk group? It's a human being that's still breathing. Everyone is at risk. We know there are groups that statistically are much more likely to either contract it or particularly to become ill as a result of it, potentially seriously ill. And certain demographics will be at lower risk than others. But from an individual's point of view, we don't know who that is. You could have a 90-year-old diabetes sufferer who's had major heart surgery in their life, who goes out and hugs 100 infected people a day and doesn't actually suffer any illness themselves. And you could have someone who's fit and healthy, no underlying conditions, never needed a doctor in their life, firing fit, who adopts social distancing, wears a face mask, goes shopping, walks down an aisle where there's some cough droplets that were deposited in the air several minutes before, but they hang in the air, walks through it, into their eyes, catch it, infected, and die from it. You know, who wants to play the percentages in something as serious as this? You know, because it's very much like the lottery. Something like this is like the lottery. You know, what we call the more vulnerable groups, It's not. It's not. It's a bit of a misnomer, I think, to call them at-risk groups, because everyone's at risk. The higher risk groups, the more vulnerable groups, arguably just buying more of those lottery tickets, and some others are buying just one of them. But even if you buy 100 lottery tickets, doesn't mean to say you're going to win. And if you buy one lottery ticket, well, you can still win. Someone has to win. So it's a lottery that no one wants to win. So this is the problem here. So when you say at-risk groups would only be like to catch it if they also break lockdown rules, that's also not true. Because the problem with the people breaking the rules is not that they are more likely to catch it. They are, of course. It's that they are more likely to spread it, because they are coming into contact with more vectors for the infection, more likely to be an asymptomatic carrier. And just, as I say, all you have to do is walk down a supermarket aisle, talk to someone, or a little cough. And it's just a little cough. You're not ill, you haven't got a persistent cough, you haven't got the coronavirus, or so you think. You just, little cough. And you droplets in the air, suspended in the air for several minutes. Someone behind you, observing all the rules, hasn't gone out except to go to that supermarket, unluckily, a couple of minutes before you, down the same aisle, into their eyes. Done. And that's, that is the key point about this. But anyway, next one. Oh, back to some politics, cracking. So it says, Boris's legacy will be one of great shame, as it will be for Trump. Give this a decade or two and these right-wing populists are going to look very silly indeed. They've been on a run, but they've got nothing to show for the bluster, and it will be extremely entertaining to watch it unravel. I'm going to have to disagree there. I am absolutely certain that, yes, you give it a decade or two and these populists will look, well, we will look silly, or the general population will look silly for ever putting them in place. The thing is that they personally are not going to suffer from this. Even if Donald Trump suffered a humiliating defeat in this year's presidential elections, which he may or may not, but even if he did, what suffering? He may get arrested, actually, in that particular case, maybe. My worry is always this weird thing that Americans do where they give their president, once they've elbowed them out, go, we don't want you anymore, they give them 2 months to still be president. What? No. And that's what it is as well. Because with American presidents, certainly in modern times, I'm not an expert on the history of this, but certainly in my lifetime, it has generally seemed to be the case that if you are president for one term, you generally become president for two, unless you are just, it's almost like being sacked if you don't win a second term. So if Donald Trump does lose, he's basically been sacked for incompetence. In what other job are you sacked for gross negligence or incompetence and still get another 2 months to be in charge? And it's absolute madness. But, let's say he personally might suffer if he doesn't, maybe, I don't know, maybe he will resign at that point if he loses the election. Pence becomes president. Donald Trump admits to everything. Pence pardons him. And then the FBI can't touch him. I don't know. But Boris Johnson won't. Boris Johnson, or very, very unlikely to. And again, a decade or two. Who's got a decade or two? Yes, history is going to judge them harshly. We know this because history always judges these charlatans harshly. Doesn't help people in the present, does it? It doesn't give me any succor to think that, the future generations will see just how ridiculous this was. We are still suffering. It brings, how much relief does it bring to anyone who has to live through such evil times that history is going to judge them, with a clear view. And so, it will be a legacy of shame. It will be a shame to the country, the United States and the United Kingdom, both. This period of time in future is going to be seen as one of great shame. I agree with that. And absolutely give it a decade or two. And they will be seen for the charlatans they were. But one, they're not going to suffer. They're not going to suffer, or I don't believe they're going to suffer. And two, it's not going to be at all entertaining, even if I'm still about for it. Because the people watching it unravel will still be suffering from the effects of it. Because times like this take generations to recover from. We've seen this in the past. Generations. And I don't know how much worse it's going to get. It could get a lot worse. And it is a huge fear of mine. But the other problem is you can't even say we'll kill off the idea at all, because history keeps repeating itself. What the UK and the US are doing right now is no different to what other countries have done in the past. And, you know, sometimes those other countries have learnt the lesson and you can't imagine them making the same mistakes. But we're making the mistakes others have made in the 20th century and before. So what's to stop other countries in the future making the same mistakes? We don't learn from history. So the fact that history will record all this correctly in 20 years' time, say a couple of decades' time, at the moment brings me no peace at all, and I don't believe it will in 20 years' time either. But that is my view. That's just my view. Next one. So this is regarding the now serious situation, seriously underreported situation as well, with British farms lacking the people physically needed to pick fruit and veg. Someone saying here, we already import over 40% of our food. Pretty sure it's over 50%. I think these are out by about 10%. But I'll go with it for now because it doesn't matter. It's a bloody large number is the key point. And our food 30% from the EU. Our rotting food is going to make us even more reliant on food from the EU than we already are. Indeed, I'd made that point. Is this really the time to pick a food fight over fish and Brexit? Apparently we hold all the cards, but when the chips hit the fan, surely the most important cards are food. Well, food and medicines, because medicines will rear its ugly head at some point as well. Fortunately, medicines don't literally grow on trees, so we don't need people to pick them. Dispensers is the closest. But we're going to have a problem when Brexit, if a hard Brexit does come, it's not just going to be food, it's going to be medicines as well. But indeed, this is, and this is what is being underreported. It's absolutely maddening, isn't it? We import such a large amount of food, and we're struggling at the moment to get the food that we produce ourselves to market. And that's going to have two effects. First of all, obviously that means less food in our markets. Now, people may say, well, we'll just have to import more. Will we? Because the particular problems we're having, although it shines a spotlight on the nonsense of Brexit, it's not Brexit that's caused this problem this year. It would be causing it next year, but it's not causing it this year. It's just the same effect, but a different cause. That cause is also in place throughout Europe. So there are also farms in other European countries that are having similar problems. So we may not be able to simply just import more. And if we did, because here's the situation. If we can't import more, we are going to have food shortages that are caused by supply. Now, we have had shortages caused by excessive demand when the lockdown was first rearing its head. Before the lockdown even began, but when it was starting to be talked about, people panic bought food in the UK shops and we had shortages. We still have shortages now of some things. Not as many things as we used to. It's not nearly as bad now. It's quietened down, but there are still some shortages. And it's not caused by supply, it's caused by too much demand. Now, what would happen with Brexit is we would not only have that extra demand because of the panic buying. For those who can afford to panic buy, again, spare a thought for the millions of people in poverty who can't even really afford enough food on a daily basis, let alone afford to stockpile, unless they learn to digest mud and stones. Actually, my girlfriend's pugs are giving that a go. But we won't be able to import as much either. And with Brexit, we won't be able to import as much because of chaotic border arrangements that we haven't got in place. But right now, we may not be able to import as much because if other countries are not able to produce as much, that means less available for export from those countries because their own countries will be wanting to buy it. So we have a sticky situation this year that it shines a spotlight, and as they say here, is this really a time to pick a food fight? Because food is utterly crucial, and you would think politically crucial. I mean, a lot of the time I will talk about things being crucial just from a social sense, things like education and healthcare. But the Conservatives don't see those as essential. They see that it's essential that they and their families have access to those things, but they pay for them privately. But they don't see that the rest of us should need them. But something like food or medicine, well, they don't necessarily care. But it's, the way I always look at this is if you've got someone who's supporting the government at the moment for whatever reason, and they're looking at the scenario and the government say, oh, we're providing, brilliant healthcare, and they go, because they've not personally had to encounter this level of great healthcare or know anyone who has, they accept it. They just accept it. And if the government say they're providing great standard of education, again, if they are not in a position to be able to judge it, they just accept it. And there's all these things, the government were even lying last year about the economy being in a great shape when it was absolutely not. It's flatlining, literally. And, but people will accept it. But when the government starts saying, no, the shelves are fully stocked, we haven't got a problem with food supply, but you go to the shops and the shelves are empty, it's a little bit more difficult to then accept that what the government are saying is true. And if they say that we haven't got a problem with getting medicines into the country, and yet someone or yourself is unable to get the medicines they need to live because there's shortages, and the doctors are saying, or they can write out a prescription, but the pharmacist is saying, I haven't got any in and we can't get any in, I don't know when we're going to get some in, and you're going, I need this to live, and it's like, I don't have any and we're not getting any in. Again, it's much more difficult to believe the government in that situation. So it's a constant bafflement to me that the government would set us on the course where we are going to have those food and medicine shortages, because even though they will inevitably blame it on something else, is that really going to work for someone who doesn't have the food they need to live or doesn't have the medicines they need to live? In a situation like that, I would argue that quite a lot of people are less interested in whose fault it is and why it isn't being fixed. Next one. Saying, watching Boris trying to copy Trump is like many things these days, a combination of tragedy and comedy. And it is, and I know someone in a reply to this said, oh, it's really just tragedy. You have to see the comedy in it, and it's gallows humour, but you do have to see it. And there'll be people who think they are displaced from this, who may see it as funny, people in other countries. Within the UK and within the US, it doesn't actually necessarily seem as funny as it might to others. I would argue that people potentially in other countries who think it's a bit funny maybe just don't realise how it will impact them as well. Again, I'll point out to a few years ago when the IMF said that the two biggest threats to the global economy were China's slowdown and Brexit. And now here we are in an economic crisis, the likes of which they weren't thinking about at the time. And yet, one of the greatest threats is still Brexit. Obviously, the coronavirus crisis is going to cause far more global economic damage, as well as local economic damage, than Brexit, of course. But Brexit on top of it is just going to be absolutely ludicrous, insane. And there's an increasing number of economists groups, as well as business groups, that are arguing much more vocally for an extension to the transition period because of the damage it's going to do globally to everyone. So although the epicenter will be the country of origin, so for Trump's nonsense, the United States, Boris Johnson's nonsense, the United Kingdom, the ripples are going to be felt everywhere. And when you've got the US and the UK, two of the wealthiest nations, two of the larger economies in the world, both doing this, then the devastation is going to be real. But at the same time, you have to stay sane. At the end of the day, the way I generally look at these things is I'm not the cause of it. I argue against some of these things and I discuss them, but you have to be able to see the funny side. And it is. I mean, some of the things that they are both doing are... You can't even parody them. That is the humour of it. You cannot even do a parody anymore of some of the... You know, if you could literally just get someone in a silly blonde wig or a nylon hairpiece, depending on who you wish to parody, and just literally say verbatim some of the things that Donald Trump has said and Boris Johnson has said. And if, let's say, you'd just woken out of a coma and you were just watching this, you would probably think it was comedy. In fact, you could actually watch... I think if you'd actually been in a coma for the last 10 years and you just came round and the nurse put the telly on for you and you watched a press conference for Donald Trump or for Boris Johnson, I think you could actually think that it was some spoof, you know, one of these like spoof news comedy shows, like Brass Eye, if anyone remembers that. You could absolutely believe that that's what it is, but it's not. It's real. And therein lies the tragedy. But there it is. There it is. Have to look on the bright side of life, don't you? Last one. So, going back to the old Brexit topic, it says this government is no better prepared for a no deal than it was prepared for a pandemic. It's no good pretending, ignorance. Both came with a warning. God help us all. How many more lives are these Tories willing to sacrifice? Well, I'll answer the last one really quickly because it's dead easy. All of them. All but their own. But anyway, I just thought this statement was very good because it said the government is no better prepared for a no deal than it was prepared for a pandemic. Because the mirror there is absolute. Because exercise Cygnus that we were all told about was, for those who still don't know, was an exercise, funnily enough, run by the British government in 2016 to playtest effectively a pandemic. It was designed around a flu pandemic, a serious flu outbreak in the UK, looking at our preparation for it, how well would we be ready for it, and then what to do to get ourselves ready. And then they just completely ignored all the findings. They didn't put anything in place. And 2016 was, of course, when it was the year of Brexit as well. So in 2000, you know, the parallels are quite good. You know, so there came a point in 2016 when we knew not only was a major pandemic coming, we didn't know exactly what it was. We, you know, the World Health Organization thought most likely a flu pandemic. Turned out to be coronavirus, but what, I mean, that could just mean that there's still a flu outbreak waiting. I mean, could you imagine? It's not a very cheery thought, but could you imagine? We get through this and then the flu pandemic that everyone was fearing anyway then comes in its wake. There's nothing to say that it won't. You know, it's a bit like we're due a massive extinction level asteroid smacking into the earth right now. We're statistically due. Now let's say one hit us and wiped us all out. Doesn't mean to say another one wouldn't be on the way close behind. You know, we might not get any respite from the next pandemic that comes along. But 2016 was the year when we knew we had to get ready for a pandemic. We didn't know how long we had, but we knew we had to get ready. 2016 was also the year when that same government knew that it had to get ready for Brexit. And it knew because that same government, the Conservative government, have dictated the narrative of Brexit. So they also knew, surely, that it was going to include, for example, many more border checks. But they didn't employ anyone to do these jobs. They haven't built new facilities. They haven't expanded the existing facilities. So you're quite right. They are no better prepared for a no deal than it's prepared for the pandemic. And yeah, you're right. Both of them came with warnings and at the same time. In fact, actually, the pandemic warnings came from much earlier. They had about 10 years worth of warnings. It could be argued that exercise Cygnus itself was years late. Actually conducting the exercise was years late. But it did happen. And we had years to implement it and we didn't. Just like we've had years to implement some facilities for Brexit and we didn't. And we're still not really. The only measure that we've actually put in place is Michael Gove has set up something to try and recruit a load more border staff. Okay, we're going to need that. But that's it. He hasn't actually recruited them. And we haven't trained them. We haven't got them working yet. And we haven't created the extra facilities that they're going to need to work at. But in terms of how many more lives they're willing to sacrifice, there's no limit. There's no limit. And while the media fails to hold them to account for it, that limitless attitude will remain. But there you go. On that cheery note, we'll leave that for this week. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.